letting you know that we're going to record. So if folks could hover over to that Got It button, we record these sessions so that we can put them on our website, our greateducation.org Advocates Network page. So you can go back and look at any meeting that has happened over the course of this year, the slides for that meeting. And so thanks so much for letting us record for folks who might not be able to join us, but want to be a part of this work alongside all of us. We started the Advocates Network back in August to really do two key things that are really important to us: build community and take action together as a community. And so we meet the second Tuesday of every month from 4:30 to 5:30 right here on Zoom. And so really want to encourage folks as we enter the new year in January, think of a few friends that you might want to invite to come join us for our Advocates Network meeting in January. I'll remind folks of the date at the end of the meeting so that you can jot that down. But would love to just continue to see folks showing up and showing out as public education advocates and supporters. And we're here every Tuesday, every second Tuesday of the month, from 4:30 to 5:30. And as we come together, we do three key things: listen, have an opportunity to connect, usually in breakout rooms; learn. Really excited to have two topics to share with y'all tonight: a really relevant and timely action around our social studies standards that are under review at the state level. And we have a guest speaker tonight, Chris Stifler from Colorado Fiscal Institute, to share a little bit more about a topic that's really important to our ballot measure that we're exploring for 2022. And so excited that tonight for our Learn section, we also have a guest speaker. And so you'll get to meet Chris, and excited to have him on the call as well. And at the end of today's meeting, we'll make sure that you have a clear set of actions that you can take to advocate on the issues that we're going to talk about today. Because we're building a learning community together, and putting on my teacher hat, I was a former middle school teacher, just feel like it's important that for us to come together around some commitments that we can share so that we can come to this work together, build a learning space where folks can be vulnerable, but also like a space where we can connect on our values and build this movement stronger every time. And so as we come together, hope that these are some things that we can agree to as a community. Move up, move back, which essentially means share your thoughts, but also share the space. So if you're noticing in your small group or in the full group meeting that you've had the opportunity to share your thoughts or your questions, we want to create space for others who might be processing or who just haven't had the chance to take that space yet. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. And so we're here to learn together. And I think that's really the power of community. We're here to offer up what we know, but we know you have just as much to offer, if not more, of your expertise, your knowledge, and your experience. So inviting folks to be learners and teachers in this space, because at Great Ed, we are both learners and teachers in this work as well. Connecting together around some shared values. So hoping that folks are coming into this space with that positive intent to take action together. But words matter. And so if we have an opportunity to learn from each other, to acknowledge an impact that we might have had on someone and maybe we didn't intend, just encourage folks to lean in with questions and to learn in this space from others and acknowledge our impact if we made an impact that we didn't intend. You'll have access to all the Zoom tools. So if you have questions, I'm doing my best to look at the chat to see if you pop in questions in the chat. If you have any technical issues, feel free to reach out to our team and we'll do our best to support you. And last but not least, want to start our transition into our listen section first by giving a land acknowledgement. And the reason that we provide a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our Advocates Network meetings is to try to create a really inclusive space here on this Zoom call and in this virtual space. For non-Indigenous communities, a land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring that we are living and working and advocating on land of Indigenous peoples. And so acknowledgement in this way is just one act of trying to resist the erasure of Indigenous histories, which is a longstanding practice in America and its treatment of Indigenous peoples. And so this is just a small part of us working towards honoring and inviting truth. Tonight, we're also going to talk about what's happening at the state level for us to really try to advance a more representative and inclusive history and civics education that will include the contributions of all peoples, including Indigenous peoples here in our state. And so I would just like to start and kick off our meeting by acknowledging that the land on which I reside and that I'm calling in from today, Denver, is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. Great Ed also acknowledges and recognizes the 48 contemporary tribal nations that are historically tied to this land that we call the state of Colorado. And so we acknowledge the history of genocide and removal of Indigenous peoples, but also hope that we can honor the past, current, and future contributions, social contributions of Indigenous communities across our state. And that's really part of our fight for an education where all students can graduate prepared to lead their best lives. If you're ever interested, again, our slides are linked on our Advocates Network page on our website. This link right here, if you click on it, will take you to a map of Colorado where you can put in your address and see where you're zooming in from today, which Indigenous peoples or tribes called home, the place that you call home. And so encourage folks to do some of that self-learning. And that link is there. Nicole Shea is going to prepare us to go into breakout rooms, and our listen question for today, which I'll make sure that I broadcast into your rooms as well. Kind of two different ways that you can have your discussion in small groups today. One, we're going to talk about an action that we're taking to work towards a Colorado where there is more honest and inclusive education for our students. So would love for folks to think about and just take some reflection on what would an honest, inclusive education look like, feel like, or sound like. So what are some examples of what that might look like or sound like or feel like? Or maybe how you want to approach this conversation is, what would an honest, inclusive education mean for students in your community? If we could have and achieved a more honest and inclusive education, what might that impact be for our students? So Nicole Shea is going to be putting together our breakout rooms. You will see a prompt on your screen asking you to join that room. We'll have some time in breakout rooms, about 6-7 minutes for some initial discussion, and then I want to bring this back to the whole group. And so when you see that invitation, you'll just want to click join your room. Great. If you have some technical difficulties, we'll stick around here in the break in the main rooms that you have an opportunity to chat more. Hello, hello. Welcome back, folks. Great, great. In our breakouts for our listen portion, we were chatting about the questions on the screen, either what would an honest, inclusive education look like, feel like, sound like, or what would an honest, inclusive education mean for students in your community? I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see folks and your beautiful faces. And so would love for someone to be able to come off of mute and kick off our share out. And I'm going to encourage folks to like really be listening for what other folks are saying and sharing, because when one of our take actions for today will be an opportunity for you to sign a petition where you'll have a comment box where you can add your thoughts about why an honest, inclusive education is meaningful to you. And you might hear something from another participant that might end up in your petition. And so just want to just have folks be thinking about that. And if there's something you hear that really resonates with you, maybe jot it down so that you come back to it later. Would someone like to kick us off and just share, in the spirit of our norms, move up, move back, just maybe one thing that either you shared or that you heard that really resonated with you? Who would like to start?
I'll start. Our group, no problem. So our group was Martha, Chris, Kathy, Nancy. Okay, hold on. Let me see who else. I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody who was participating and see that. Okay, who's oh, Kendall. Hey. There he goes. So we talked about what one thing that was brought up in our conversation was sound. And Kendall said where he's from, that, you know, they had a great music department. And they just kicked off this conversation about how to teach history through music and what that could be and what that looks like for so many kids and where you can expand that. And so that was one of the things that we talked about, and Nancy brought up, well, the fees come from Tabor, yes, and so we want to make sure that where fees came from was due to the per pupil funding where we are now, and so that's the history of that. Let's see, and also teaching, when it comes to teaching, when you talk about the social studies standards, honesty in teaching, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it has to be taught. You can't sugarcoat some and you delete others, because you're erasing out, you're whitewashing a lot of the history that we hear now, and you're just totally deleting what you don't want to be heard, and who's in charge of that. So my group, anything you want to add to that in one or two words? I probably didn't hit all that, but I'm trying to hurry.
Awesome. Anyone else want to hop in from maybe another group?
Where did it come from?
Anything else that resonated? What would an honest, inclusive education mean for students in your community? What might that look like, feel like, sound like?
I'll throw out something. I was thinking about if everybody doesn't get bullied, like a lot of the people are being called, racial slurs and things like that, and they report back to their folks about it, and complain to the principal. And I think if they understood inclusion, that stuff wouldn't happen so much, and maybe we could actually have a lower suicide rate among our young people.
That inclusion is also about building a safe and inclusive culture in schools. I think that really resonates with me.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to add in?
I feel like maybe we saw an example of this recently with a teacher in Denver, or a principal in Denver, who sent a letter home to families about Thanksgiving, and just sharing another perspective about Thanksgiving, and letting parents know that they were going to be covering a unit where all perspectives were going to be discussed, and how some people feel like this is actually a really hurtful holiday to celebrate. And so that really stuck out for me, and I thought that was maybe an example of us sharing accuracy with families. And yeah.
Great. One last share out.
I guess I'd add one thing, and this was, I found this question hard to answer, but what it means to the kids, what it means to a community is that if we learn thorough and accurate history, we're obviously less likely to repeat it. And that's what's so important long-term.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I appreciate y'all for engaging in those discussions, because there is a really important opportunity for ourselves in our communities and across our state to take action and actually see progress on a more honest and inclusive educational experience for our students, for our educators. And I want to share a little bit about that process, so that you know how you can take action, because this is a timeline that's moving pretty quickly. After that, the second part of our learn portion will be continuing our ballot brainstorm for next year and answering this question: what is this Tabor surplus thing? Because that's going to be important in understanding how we're trying to get more adequate and equitable funding into our K-12 schools with a potential ballot measure next year. But before we do that, our state Board of Education, so at the state level, we have a version of a school board that has a different level of responsibility and decisions. In Colorado, we're a local control state, so local school boards make a lot of decisions. But one of the things that our state Board of Education does is review our statewide academic standards. And those statewide academic standards are everything from arts and social studies, computer science, physical education, languages, reading, writing, math, all of the types of things that our educators are bringing to our students in the classroom from kindergarten all the way till when we graduate from high school. And our standards are split into different groups and are under review every 6 years. And so this year, under review and under revision are our arts and social studies standards. Feeding into this process are 6 different bills that have been passed by our legislature over the last 3 years that have been different ways that we hope to build a more inclusive, more representative social studies standards that include the perspectives, history, social contributions of just like a broader set of voices in our communities. So Coloradans who identify as Black, Latino, Asian American, LGBTQIA, lots of different perspectives that are currently missing from our educational experiences and our social studies standards. And so where this is at in the process is kind of a collection of groups have been reviewing social studies standards. Some of this is done by CDE staff, who are the Colorado Department of Education that is helping to move this process forward. There's been engagement with stakeholders, and there's some of that happening now, and there will be more opportunities that we'll have for folks to consider over taking action today. And the standards that are in front of the state board have come from different review committees that are curriculum experts, parents, teachers, and folks who really understand like how our social studies standards currently work and how we can make them better based off of the bills that have come from the state legislature. But ultimately, the State Board of Education will make the decision on what our standards will look like and approve those standards by the end of this school year. So right now, we're in a feedback period on those standards, and we want to be able to share a petition with y'all about standing up as a community for honest and inclusive education. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and if you're at a computer or if you are on your phone, it should work either way. But I want to give folks an opportunity to see what this petition is. And I'm also going to show it on my screen. So if you hover over to the chat, you'll see a link that says secure.everyaction and then some fun letters and numbers at the end. That's the link you're going to want to click on. And when I click on this, it takes me to a petition. And so by signing this petition, we're saying that we believe it's time for our social studies standards to be updated to include the perspectives, history, culture, and social contribution of all groups. You're joining folks who say that they want schools that ensure all our students, families, and communities feel welcomed, included, and represented. That we want all students to learn the honest and comprehensive history of our nation, along with the critical thinking skills that serve them as citizens of our democracy for their entire lives. And for those reasons, we're calling on the state board to accept recommendations from the Social Studies Standards Committee, which reflect the work of experts, including teachers and parents. As you're checking that out, you'll see along the top, we've got a goal of 3,000 signatures. We've got about 391 signatures as of right this second of me opening up the link. Excited to have a strong start, but this is really about the strength of our community. So I'll pause here to see if anybody has any questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen so that folks can ask those questions to the group. Thoughts, questions, reactions? Sean, I think I see you off mute.
I just wanted to say I love that Great Ed is doing that, and I signed the petition, and it's I think we need to send a clear message. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
And I would just say that, you know, the standards, the people putting the new standards together, I think have done a really great job in emphasizing critical thinking and in the civic standards. The skills needed to evaluate all different kinds of media and to evaluate the sources from which your kids are getting information, all with an eye towards building smarter students and better civic-minded people. So I think we need to support the standards as they've been revised as much as we can.
Yes, Ms. Marinelli.
Where can we get a copy of those standards?
Absolutely. I'll put a link in the chat right now of the standards, or I'll be looking for that and I'll get that into the chat ASAP. so that you can see what those standards look like. I will say the document is 140 pages long. And so one of the things that I've been encouraging folks as you look through it is like, I was a 7th grade middle school teacher. So I went and really looked at the 7th grade standards to see like the changes that were happening for the students that I taught. Maybe you have students that are entering a grade that you want to see what they would be learning next year or in future years, just finding ways to make that a little bit more digestible of a document. But I will send that link here ASAP.
The other thing I think that's important to note, these are the standards that districts actually set the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be other issues once the districts start to revise their curriculum based on the new standards. But the standards kind of set the goals for what the schools should be doing in their curriculums, where they need to be getting the kids.
And that's where we'll continue this work, is after the state level that goes to local communities, and we'll be here to support folks in that work as well.
Well, just a point on that, we've been going through a lot in our school district, and we had an excellent meeting last night. And one of the things that I can see happening as soon as this hits the school districts is the whole anti-CRT movement is going to explode, because that's when the robust conversations are going to take place at the district level. So I think it's very important that we are working toward helping all the districts deal with that.
Absolutely. That's why when we have folks sign this petition, we're asking just for your zip code, so that when this moves to a local level, that we have an idea of where folks have signed this petition, so that we can reach out and be proactive about support once this moves from a state level issue to a local issue. So if you're looking at the petition and curious why we're asking for zip code, just so we can figure out potentially like what school district you might be in, so that we can support you in that work. I'm going to put just a teeny little pin, because when we get to the take action section, I'm going to bring this petition back up, ask you to do a few things, and we'll have some more time for Q&A there. But really excited that we have a special guest with us today, Chris Stifler, who is an economist with the Colorado Fiscal Institute. And in our previous Advocate Network meetings, we've been talking about a potential ballot measure for 2022 through the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition that would ask voters to prioritize our students, our educators, as our economy recovers, because Colorado and Tabor has this wonky thing called a Tabor surplus. And I like to put that in quotes because I am thinking, like, when we say surplus, that to me is artificial, because when we look at the things that our students and our educators need, we know that our schools are not living in a surplus world. But in order to actually put real data, real understanding behind this topic, and have invited Chris from CFI, a really close, strong partner of ours, to share more and answer your questions that you might have about this thing called a Tabor surplus. So Chris, I'm going to kick it over to you. I think you have the ability to share your screen if we did everything. Perfect.
Hear me and see me, Cody? Cool, thanks for inviting me. So here's the paradox to consider when I'm talking in the next 10 minutes. Back 20 years now, voters basically said that we want to prioritize education. We want to fund education at this level. Well, today we're more than $500 million below that level. Okay, so we're $500 million in the hole on where we want to be funding our schools. Next year, because of Tabor, we're going to return over $1 billion to taxpayers in the form of Tabor rebates. At the same time, we're $500 million short on funding our schools. That's one paradox to consider. The other paradox to consider is, back in the last recession, 2009, 2010, we made significant cuts to our schools, what the state pays for our schools. But then when we have a booming economy, we can't use the excess revenue and the big growth from our booming economy to backfill the holes we cut. Instead, we give Tabor rebates. And so I kind of want to explain how that works, how Tabor sets that up in the next 10 minutes. And then that should also help you understand what a ballot measure would look like to try to go capture some of that Tabor surplus in order to give it to schools. So before I start, I'd like to conspicuously show you what the general fund is, because this makes sense later when we're talking about where that money comes from when we return money to taxpayers in the form of Tabor rebates. So when we're talking about the state budget or the general fund, You're talking the biggest chunk of the general fund, 35 cents of every dollar we give Colorado in income tax and sales tax goes to our K-12 education. And then about 27 cents goes to Medicaid. And then you have 3 other departments that are similar in size, 9 to 10 cents of our tax dollar. That's our human services, corrections, and higher education budget. So when you hear the state budget, don't think of this nebulous thing. Think of 35 cents of a state budget is schools. Another 27 cents is Medicaid. And then you got human services, corrections, and higher ed. Well, schools also have a second form of funding, as you all know. That's the local side of things. So that this year's budget, about $4 billion came from the general fund, from that pie we just saw. And then you have a whole other side of funding from the local sources. 39% of the school finance formula came from local sources. And these are your local property taxes in your districts. So it's about 60-40 state versus local split. And this split differs depending on which school district you're in. But I wanted to start with this background to understand that when we talk about when Tabor rebates come out of the general fund, the primary source of funding mechanism for general fund is K-12. Okay. So then we have Tabor, and we boil Tabor down to 4 major provisions. First, we tell people that it limits legislators' ability to raise revenue. Interpret that as you can't raise taxes without a vote of the people in a district. So you can't have a different graduated income tax, you can't have new taxes and sales tax, you can't have different property tax without going to a vote of people in the district. Okay, so voter approval for any tax increase. Tabor also limits what types of taxes we're allowed to have. It specifically outlaws certain types of taxes like a graduated income tax or a statewide real estate transfer tax or local income taxes. So again, it limits what types of taxes we're allowed to have. Tabor also sets election provisions, basically tells us when we vote on even and odd years, what the ballot language has to look like, what the blue book has to look like, basically how we vote on taxes. That's all part of Tabor. Those are the election provisions of Tabor. And then finally, the one that we're talking about today, that's the revenue limit, and it has to deal with the Tabor rebates. And so Tabor says there's a cap on how big government can grow each year. That cap grows by inflation plus population growth each year. So if prices go up 2% and population goes up 2%, that Tabor cap can grow by 4%. And the Tabor cap I'm trying to describe with my arm here is this wonky chart here. That referendum C cap is the cap that grows by inflation plus population growth each year. And then all that we collect in taxes and fees, that's the light blue bars you're seeing in this graph. Those are all the taxes and fees subject to the Tabor cap. They have to stay below the cap. If we collect more taxes and fees than the cap allows, then all that revenue above the cap gets returned in the form of Tabor rebates to taxpayers. And you can see the current fiscal year we just finished, we're $471 million above that cap. So the state budget can't keep that money and pay for roads and bridges and schools or higher education. It returns that $471 million to Tabor in the form of Tabor rebates. And I'm going to describe what that looks like in a second. But look at the out years, the projection. A lot of that has to do with the big stimulus money we got from the federal government from COVID. The economy is reviving to life after the pandemic. The economy is pumping a lot of income tax into the system. And we're basically exceeding the growth that referendum C cap allows. And so next year, we're projected to return $1 billion. 2 years out, we're projected to return $1.4 billion. And that's why I wanted to situate the negative factor or the budget stabilization factor, but basically our shortfall of education of what voters said in the Constitution in 2000. Again, we're at $570 million below that cap. Situate that $571 million into the $1 billion that Tabor says we have to return to voters. And it gets more complicated because both taxes and fees drive these rebates. So we use this similarly as the bucket. Both fees, cash fund fees, and taxes flow into the bucket. But when you get too much water in the bucket, the water that gets flowed out to taxpayers in the form of Tabor rebates comes out of the general fund. So notice the gray water that's paying the spigot for general fund comes out of the gray water of the general fund. And again, that's why I started with that general fund pie. The biggest chunk of that general fund is K-12 education. So every dollar you're given in Tabor rebates is one less dollar you could be using to pay for schools. And so Tabor rebates, there's 3 mechanisms through which we return money to taxpayers. And these have changed over the years. Tabor in our Constitution doesn't dictate how we return the money. Our legislators write bills to decide how we return money. Again, there's been like 21, 22, couple dozen different ways of doing it. We've whittled them down to 3 mechanisms currently on the books. And that first mechanism is that we fund the senior homestead property tax exemption. This is the exemption if you've lived in your house for more than 10 years and you're older than 65. You get to essentially exempt $100,000 worth of value. So you don't have to pay property taxes on $100,000 of your property's value. So it gives, about a $600 property tax break to seniors who have lived in their home for 10 years. Well, the state funds that, and that's about $160 million. That can be funded out of Tabor rebates. The second mechanism is called the 6-tier sales tax. It's just a complicated way of dividing everyone into 6 different tiers, depending on where their income falls. And then each person in each tier gets a portion of what that tier gets. It has nothing to do with sales tax. It's just a funny accounting trick. And then finally, the third mechanism, if we have Tabor rebates that are large enough, it triggers a reduction in the income tax rate. So currently our income tax rate is 4.55%. The Tabor rebate mechanism on the books is a reduction from 4.55 to 4.5. And so you can see Ledge Council's chart here. The current fiscal year we just finished, that we got to refund that $471 million. It's large enough to trigger all 3 mechanisms. So we first pay for the homestead exemption, that first $163.8 million. And then we fully fund the reduction in the income tax from that 5 basis points. That cost $120 million. And then the rest kind of gets cleaned up by the 6-tier sales tax refund. And you can see, this is, to put it in your perspective, each taxpayer, an average taxpayer is probably going to get about $37 from the 6th tier, and maybe, a reduction, another $20 from their income tax reduction if you're a, medium household. So you're talking like $50 probably for a median household in Tabor rebates this year. Of course, it's more if you're, if you're Von Miller making millions of dollars. Well, he's not Von Miller, he's not here anymore. He's at the Rams. Damn it. If you're $1 million Bronco, the reduction in the income tax is worth a lot more to you, but the average household's thinking about $50. But in the out years, when we're given $1 billion back, yeah, you're talking $200, $250 to the average household in Tabor rebates. So it makes a different decision on whether to basically, forego your Tabor rebates if you're talking $37 versus $237 in some of these out years. But a big chunk of money has to be returned to taxpayers that can't be kept by the state because Tabor requires it. And that kind of situates the situation we're in now is basically we're going to have to give back $1 billion. Our legislators have to return $1 billion, so they can't keep it and use it to pay for schools or roads or backfill the cuts we made to education in the last 10 years. They have to return it. And so it's a great time to start tweaking those Tabor rebates or basically debrucing a lot of that revenue so it doesn't get returned to taxpayers. And that's what a lot of local school districts and local counties and cities did. They basically kind of said, let's get rid of the cap, let's keep all the money we can collect. And that's not quite what they're looking to do with this ballot initiative. But basically, if it's the ballot initiative I was thinking of, the change of the state education fund to 2/3, yeah. So basically, it would basically say currently about $800 million of our income tax doesn't count toward this bar because of what we voted on in Amendment 23, almost more than 20 years ago. Basically, this ballot initiative would ask voters to say, let's double that. And so essentially that would be like sucking $800 million out of the bar. So think of that bar dropping by $800 million. That $800 million would then be dedicated to state education fund, be locked in for schools. And the money, the cushion you're sucking that $800 million out is all this excess Tabor surplus money above the cap. And so essentially it would be asking voters to kind of bypass some of their Tabor rebates and pump, several $100 million more into the state education fund and guarantee it for education. So in years where we have all this Tabor surplus, it's a great time to kind of try to capture some of that, all that surplus, keep it for schools. But again, it's just sacrificing your Tabor rebates that each taxpayer would be then foregoing.
Great. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A. Chris, if you don't mind taking your slides down for this part. I'll also, Lisa, encourage you if you want to share anything as part of the Q&A or respond to anything. It'll be kind of like Lisa, Chris, and I answering your questions. And we got about 5 minutes for Q&A about Tabor surpluses. And before we do that, yeah, just that reminder of really, again, the ballot measures we've been talking about is going to the voters and asking, we've got 10 plus years, almost 13 years of debt that we've been writing to students from the BS factor, the borrowing from students factor. And in this year alone, that's $572 million. Next year, we're going to be returning $1 billion to voters, while at the same time continuing to use the BS factor to write debt to our schools and to our teachers. And so our concept that we're going to explore as an opportunity for voters is asking our voters, is it finally time to prioritize education because our economy is doing well? Kendall, I see your question, and then we'll hop in. If anybody else has a question, I'll also be looking at the chat.
Awesome, thanks. And thank you, Chris. My question has to do with the temporary income tax reduction. And I guess I'm curious, like, over what period of time that's taking place? Because I think, people might notice $20 or $30 more in their paycheck, at one time. But if this is spread out over, like, I don't know how long, and it's just a couple bucks per paycheck, that seems kind of pointless, right? Or is this something that happens like at tax season and it's actually like a rebate in that sense?
Yeah, I think most people would recognize that at tax season. So this tax year 2021, we're just finishing. So when you do your wait to April, the tax year we're living in right now, assume that you're paying all your income at 4.5% instead of 4.55%. But again, I mean, the average household has 35, 40,000 taxable income. 5 basis points is margin. I mean, I don't know, a couple margaritas.
We have a question in the chat from Paula. I might ask Lisa to look at this question. I'll read it out loud. How about dedicating the total rebate to teacher salaries?
We're trying to get as much feedback as we can about this. That has come up a lot. I mean, that is clearly one of the biggest issues facing our districts, is not even being able to hire folks because the salaries are so low and they're competing with the private sector where the jobs are not demanding martyrdom and they get paid well. Also paraprofessionals. So that brings up a great point. It's also the nutrition folks and the bus drivers having a really hard time attracting talent and being able to keep that. So there's a lot of answers to this. One thing is that Tabor has created this world where we have a very bulky, cumbersome process to make changes. And so the one that we're looking at now would just say the dollars have to go into the state education fund without saying where the dollars need to go or are required to go. If the legislature were to decide to look at the same mechanism, they could probably have an easier, they have much finer tools to determine this. And they ultimately will, if we were to get this money debruced, taken out of that Tabor surplus, and taken out of that blue bar that Chris was showing. They have a greater ability to fine tune where those dollars would go. Paul, I think you're absolutely right. The public likes money being targeted. The public also wants the dollars determined locally. So one of the things that we really think about here is that with Amendment 73, one thing that we did and we would very much want to do here is have every district say what they're going to do with the money. Because some districts may need to pay teachers more, and some districts may need to pay more teachers. Nobody told the districts, there were 178 districts whose budgets have been cut, and the legislature didn't say raise class size or freeze teacher pay. They didn't want to take the heat for those decisions. It was school boards who had to make all of those decisions. And so every school board responded as best they could for their communities. And so one of the things that we think about is making sure that every, and you're right, Paula, and we're thinking about that. It may or may not be able to be done with the single subject. But what we do know is that local mill levies pass more often than statewide things. And part of that is because people feel that they understand their local leaders are more accountable to them. And so if we can have sort of the best of both worlds of a statewide measure that focuses on where the local community most wants to see those dollars spent, then we think we can prevail.
Great questions. Thanks for adding that into the chat. Yep, Zoom tools are at your disposal. If you're more comfortable putting a question in the chat than coming off of mute, feel free to do that. If you'd like to come off of mute, we got time for at least one more question.
One thing I would add is that in some respects, I think if you dedicated it all to teacher salaries, I mean, I know that the education community and most people who know anything about education would love to have it all go to teachers. But I think it also gives some fodder to the other side, who are, anti-union, anti-teachers, which is ridiculous. But I like the local control aspect. I think some communities maybe that don't have any VOTEC may want to put X amount to their teacher salaries and add a VOTEC program or.
Great. Thank you. Any final thoughts, questions? I just want to say, oh, sorry. I think I just saw someone come off of mute because my screen just reshuffled, but I don't see who might come off of mute.
It's me, Nancy.
Oh, hi, Senator Todd.
Oh, there. I was hitting the wrong buttons there. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I agree with, I think it was Christy that just said that about local control. I think one of the most dangerous things to do statewide is pit one program against another or pit one thing against another, whether it's teacher salaries or career tech or whether it's, schools and districts all know what they need the most. And we can say, well, we're going to give more money for staffing for rural education. But if people don't want to live in the rural areas, then, we're hamstringing that. So I think leaving it for local control is extremely important. And, I think we all agree that teacher salaries will increase and give those opportunities. But I think it's a little dangerous to put it into one area only.
Senator Todd, as you were speaking, one thing that I was reminded of was because this money is being added to the state education fund, there is a list of allowable expenses on the state education fund that are for K-12 public schools. And so we can do some work to make sure that that list is available for folks. If that's interesting to you, if you want to email me, I can send you that list. But once this money goes into the state education fund, it is protected for a certain list of things that are focused on K-12. And so just as we're talking about like, how do we best balance, I think what it sounds like is local control and like a winning message for voters is that there are some guardrails around the state education fund, which dedicate that money to K-12 education.
And I love the messaging that is coming through in terms of that we have shortchanged our schools for so long. I can't remember how you said borrowing from students or the BS factor. That really is important, that people know and understand that your $50 or your $30 refund is a small price to pay or to not get back to contribute to a solution for the whole.
Yes, and I also just my time management, my clock says 5:29. So I want to always try to end on time. And so I'm going to quickly here show what can we do today based off of what we've learned. One, I'm going to put this link back in the chat, our petition about an honest and inclusive education. Really hoping that folks will consider signing this petition, adding your voice to this really important conversation. Our deadline for this petition is January 10th, so that we can deliver the results of this petition to the state board meeting on January 12th and 13th. And so as many folks as we can share that we are a louder vocal majority, and to counteract disinformation and calls for censorship and things that are happening in our communities, and really stand together statewide and show that we want honest and inclusive education in our schools. This petition is one way to welcome folks into that advocacy. I'm going to ask that you share this with at least 10 friends. This link is something that you can email out to folks. The petition is mobile friendly, so you can take this link and text it to people and they can sign this on their phones. So this is an opportunity. Again, it's just your name. You can add a comment to the end, but really want to encourage folks, think about 10 friends or family members who you think would share this value, and share this petition with them as an opportunity. And think about maybe if they're inviting those folks to our next Advocates Network meeting. The more that we can bring more folks into this conversation about the public schools that we want for our kids and for our educators, the better and stronger this movement can be. Our next meeting is on January 11th, 2022. I made that mistake. I'm going to make that mistake for months. It says 2021 on the screen. So as I get into 2022, because I still can't believe we're almost there, it's January 11th, 2022, not 2021. Just share this on social media as an opportunity, the Advocates Network and our petition. So clear 3 tasks: sign the petition, share the petition, get others involved. It is now 5:32. I apologize profusely and sincerely for 2 extra minutes of time. Time is our most valuable resource, especially during the end of the year, a busy holiday season. From the Great Ed team, from me, hope that everyone has the chance to unplug, relax, recharge, spend time in community, whether that means with friends or with family over the next couple of weeks. This has been a long and difficult 20 months for all of us, and for some of us even more than others. And so I just hope that you have the chance to really fill your cup back up towards the end of this year, where hopefully you can take some intentional time to be just in community and with friends and family. So thank you for being along this journey with us. We'll see you in the new year. I'll stick around here and keep the room open if folks have anything that you'd like to ask or share.